So thank you everyone for coming. As I've just started recording, I've gone through the house rules. We can, I think, start the event. So I'm going to hand over to my colleagues in the campaigns team to do a bit of a presentation on the Renters Reform Bill.
Great. Thanks, everyone. My name's Ruth. I am a policy manager in Shelter's policy team, leading on our work around private renting. And we're going to be talking you through our Renters Reform Bill campaign tonight. First of all, just to kick us off, I really wanted to get a sense check of how many people here have experienced the private rented sector. I imagine it's loads of you. So I'm going to do a really quick poll. The question is, have you ever privately rented? Yes or no? And just get an idea of how many people have experienced some of the issues we're going to be talking about tonight. Just another minute to do that. And I think, quite unsurprisingly, 92% of the audience has, which is really, really great. So I think that we're going to have a lot of kind of shared experiences to talk about tonight. So to start, first of all, we just wanted to talk you through a bit about what we're dealing with. So the big picture of the private renters sector and who's living in it. We know that 19% of households privately rent in England. So that's 11 million people. That's made up of 8 million adults and 3 million children. And the really important thing is that that number is about double the number of households who are privately renting this time 20 years ago. And the number of families who are living in the private rented sector has risen even more sharply. And what this tells us is that the sector has really changed dramatically in both size and makeup over the past decades. But the crucial thing is that regulation just hasn't kept up at all. The last significant piece of private renting legislation was in the late 80s. And it was at that point that the private rented sector really just began to explode in size. And obviously regulation just hasn't kept up, which is why the PRS is just sort of no longer fit for purpose. So what needs fixing? Again, I think lots of people on this call are going to have experienced so many of the issues that we're going to talk about tonight. Some of our recent research shows that a fifth of private renters have suffered with some kind of damp or mold, condensation, poor insulation or excess cold. That was in the last month alone from January. What is another really shocking statistic is that over 3 million private renters have told us they've lived in dangerous conditions because they're worried that complaining about these conditions would trigger an eviction. And what we know really awfully through our frontline services and through research is that that fear just isn't unfounded. So there's been some research carried out by Citizens Advice, which is excellent, which shows that of those renters who do complain to their local authority about their private landlord who's not carrying out repairs, they have a 50% chance of being served with what's called a Section 21 no-fault eviction notice within 6 months of doing so. And we're going to be talking a lot about Section 21 no-fault eviction notices tonight because they're something that really makes our private rented sector just so insecure, and it's what we need to see scrapped in these forthcoming reforms to the private rented sector. So until there's proper protection in place for people, the protections that are meant to be there, because obviously everyone is meant to live in a safe home, they're just not fit for purpose. And the kind of things that the government has tried to do to make the private rented sector better have been undermined by this fundamental lack of protection caused by Section 21. So over a third of people who contact our helpline are private renters. That's more than 65,000 people. And they're coming to us for all sorts of issues. So coming to understand their rights when they're facing eviction, even facing homelessness, and experiencing discrimination and harassment from their landlord as well. I think next up, we have some pictures of the really classic disrepair issues that our clients come to us with. So faulty electrics, damp, really unsanitary conditions. And we're going to do another really quick poll just to see if these are kind of issues that you have had as well. So I'm going to launch this now. It's a multiple choice of any kinds of disrepair that you've had in living in the private renter sector. And we'll just take a minute to do that because there are quite a few options. Okay, and we're going to share this now. If you just finalise your votes, that is loads of people who have experienced these really poor conditions. So this isn't kind of a minority or a fringe of the private rented sector. This is really, really common. And it really just underpins why this campaign is so important, and it's so important for people to be, mobilised and talking about the private rented sector. Really quickly, so what is the impact that COVID-19 has had on renting? It's obviously had an impact on everything. And I think what we have really seen is that the pandemic has just exacerbated all of the problems that already existed. So, our homes are meant to have really been the first line of defence against the pandemic. We were all told to stay home and stay safe. But in fact, there have been millions of people who've just been without a safe home. So during the pandemic, 35% of private renters said their housing situation made lockdowns harder to cope with, which is unsurprising given how much time we had to spend at home. And we also know the financial impact of the pandemic has been really severe on private renters. So even pre-pandemic, 60% of private renters had no savings whatsoever to speak of. So we're not best placed to withstand the kind of shock of, the pandemic last March. And that's why we've seen hundreds of thousands of people falling into arrears since March 2020. Again, reflected in the number of benefit claimants, up to 2 million households in England who are claiming housing benefit or the housing element of universal credit, up from 1.4 million before the pandemic. And now really quickly, we're going to be talking about lots of reforms tonight, and some of them for different audiences can sound quite scary and like they're really radical changes. But actually what we really wanted to underline is that what we're asking for renters in England is actually really standard if you compare it to our kind of neighbouring countries. So private renters in England have less security by default than renters in most neighbouring countries. We can see that renters in countries where there are really large private rented sectors benefit from much greater security, so like in Germany and Denmark and the Netherlands, and that those who have really poor security of tenure tend to live in countries where there's a really small private rented sector, such as Romania, which has like under 10% of the population renting privately. We've obviously got a large PRS, nearly 20% of the population, so we really should be seeing our rights aligning with those who live in kind of countries where they do have greater security and protections. Renters kind of in France and Italy and Sweden benefit from years of protection compared to renters in England, and not just in terms of how much time they have in their properties, but also how much notice they have to give their landlords when they're leaving. And even better for the Westminster government, we can just look to our neighbours in Scotland who have benefited from longer tenancies since December 2017, and we've seen that that's had a really positive impact on people's well-being and has not caused the sky to fall in. So really promising stuff in what we're coming to discuss now.
Hi everyone, I'm Amy. I work in the public affairs team. Thanks for joining us on a Wednesday evening. I hope you've all got something in the oven for your tea. I haven't, but I hope you have. So I'm going to run through some wins that renters have had in recent years. So recently we had the Fitness for Human Habitation Act, which some of you may know of. Karen Buck led on that from a private member's bill. The Fitness for Human Habitation Act means that a rented home is legally unfit for habitation when conditions or safety issues are so bad that it's not reasonable for you to live there. So that could be because it could affect your health seriously, or it could put you at risk of physical harm or injury, or mean you can't make full use of your home. So landlords need to ensure that the place is fit for habitation throughout the tenancy, not just at the start, throughout. The Letting Fees Act in 2019, this was a huge win for renters and has saved renters, hundreds and hundreds of pounds. The ban came in on June 1st, 2019, and then in June 2020, well, it applied in June 2019 for new tenancies and then June 2020 for all tenancies. So it means you can't be charged for things like references, any admin, any credit checks or immigration checks, or renewing a tenancy. There's still some things that you can be charged for, things like late rent payments, lost keys or fobs, ending a tenancy early, things like that, but costs are capped at a reasonable rate. We then had, over the past year, due to coronavirus, there's been a lot of emergency legislation that has gone through to protect renters. Obviously, when the pandemic hit and people were furloughed, people lost their jobs, renters were in a particularly precarious situation with no security of tenure due to Section 21. So eventually the government stepped in and banned all evictions from the private rented sector. We're kind of due for that to be coming to an end over the next couple of months. So we'll see where things go from there. There was also, we've also had in 2015 the Deregulation Act, which was to get rid of revenge evictions from the PRS. I think the point to make here is that we've had lots and lots of sort of piecemeal legislation trying to tackle various things in the private rented sector. But what we really need is a comprehensive look at the entire sector, which has grown massively since the last piece of comprehensive legislation in the 80s, and really reform the sector to reflect the reality of today. So that's why we're super, super excited about the Renters Reform Bill and the possibilities of changing the whole sector. So this is a brief history of the Renters Reform Bill. Back in July 2018, the government consulted on longer tenancies, which saw thousands and thousands of people take part in that consultation, calling for longer tenancies. Next, the End Unfair Eviction Coalition launched, which resulted in 50,000 people signing a petition to demand the government get rid of Section 21, which is huge. But obviously, I mean, we need to get rid of Section 21. Then in 2019, the government promised to scrap Section 21. So I think that was James Brokenshire at the time was the Secretary of State. I think God knows how many Secretaries of State there's been since him, but he was the one at the time and he first promised to scrap Section 21. Then in August of 2019, thousands of our supporters took part in the government consultation to scrap Section 21. So they said they were going to do it, then they consulted on how they would do it. And we saw a massive amount of people writing in with their stories of Section 21. It was a great piece of engagement directly with government. So in December 2019, the government then announced the Renters Reform Bill in the Queen's Speech. So this was Boris Johnson's government's first Queen's Speech, and they announced this Renters Reform Bill, which is to go much further than just scrapping Section 21. Then March 2020, obviously COVID had hit and the government banned all evictions. November 2020, over 100,000 supporters signed a petition to ensure everyone had a safe home during the pandemic. So this is a huge amount of public support to look after renters. People know renters are in an unsafe position. And then in March, the government extended the protections until May. So what we are wanting to win in the bill and what we're going to be fighting for and campaigning for is so that every private renter has long-term security in their home, and their rights are protected and they have the power then to assert those rights. We're going to do that in various ways. We're going to be trying to achieve long-term security in the private rented sector by achieving indefinite tenancies and scrapping Section 21, no-fault evictions, and also we'll be paying very close attention to Section 8 reform, and making sure we are protecting renters. Renters' rights will be protected through various measures. A national landlord register we're going to be campaigning for. This means all landlords will have to be registered, and it will form a sort of database where if you're about to take on a new tenancy, you can look and see if the landlord on there is registered with the central system. And regulation of letting agents, this is something that the government announced in the for the Renters Reform Bill to cover as well, which should drive up standards and best practice in the sector. And then we want renters to have the power to assert their rights through providing the local authorities with more resource so that they can do checks on properties and things, and creating a regulatory body for the private sector which can well, does what it says on the tin, regulate the sector better.
Thanks, Amy. James here from the campaigns team. Sorry for the skipping back and forth there, trying to unmute myself and I pressed the wrong button. So I'm going to talk a bit about our campaigning strategy over the Renters Reform Bill and how we're planning to build pressure on the government. But before that, I've seen some comments in the chat about people being served Section 21 notices, and I thought it would be interesting to see if that's a shared experience of lots of us. I've been served a Section 21, and I'm going to launch a quick poll here. And if you could just kind of let us know if you've been served one. Cool. Yeah, so some people have, a lot of people haven't. That's really interesting. I don't know if you can see the results on your screen or if it's just me that can, but around 72% of people haven't been served one and 23% of people have. Oh, there we are. I can show the results here. So yeah, so that's kind of like being evicted from your home through a Section 21 is one of the biggest causes of homelessness in England, and it's why we're so strong at campaigning on this alongside the other policy issues. But how do we hope to build pressure on Number 10 as part of this campaign? There are three main tools we have to do that. First of all is people power. So that's lots and lots of supporters from across the country like you who are able to build pressure on the government. Over the last 18 months, we've been very successful at doing this. We've shown it through the protection that renters have got because of coronavirus. We've also seen increases to local housing allowance, increases to universal credit, and an extension to notice periods for renters that all show that when we come together and campaign for stuff, we're able to win change. Shelter has a history of winning change and campaigning on renters' rights and on preventing people from falling into homelessness. And it's really key that as part of this campaign, we all come together and have a shared voice demanding that the government do a good job of the Renters Reform Bill. Our second tool we have is the Renters Reform Coalition. So you might have seen this on our social media channels or through our email lists, but we have joined a Renters Reform Coalition of around 20 organisations in the housing and homelessness sector. We represent renters from across the country, and as part of the coalition, it basically represents the larger, it includes the larger organisations, people like ourselves, Shelter and Citizens Advice, but also much smaller grassroots organisations that work with renters on the ground every single day, including renters unions. It's really important that as part of this campaign, everyone from across the sector, everyone who represents renters is all singing from the same hymn sheet when it comes to the Renters Reform Bill. And by coming together, we're able to show that there's a unified voice in being able to put pressure on the government. And finally, it's really important that we have MPs on side for part of this. We're not going to win this campaign without winning MPs over. So we need to meet with them and persuade them that this is the right thing to do. On Monday, we launched a report about with a group of MPs about the need for private rented sector reform. Some Conservative MPs were part of that, and they have written. There was a piece in the Times on Monday all about the need for reform for the private rented sector. We also meet with MPs from across the House to talk about the Renters Reform Bill. And we also want our supporters to meet with their local MPs about the Renters Reform Bill as well. We know that MPs care what their constituents are thinking, and by having our supporters going out and speaking to MPs directly about the need for a strong Renters Reform Bill to improve the rights of renters, it's a really, really important way that we're able to win support. So far, what's our campaign look like? I hope that you've enjoyed seeing it as it's gone out on social media. I know that I'm really pleased with it. I think it's really bold, and we have some really great graphics explaining what the Renters Reform Bill is. We want to be able to deepen our engagement with supporters. So hopefully you've seen some of the slides which kind of help explain some of the policies and some of the bills that some of the policies on social media. But we also hope that you find it exciting and you want to get engaged. As the campaign goes on, we'll continue to use this bold language and we'll continue to use these bold graphics. And please do share them on your social media timelines and share them with your friends to recruit more people into the campaign, because really that people power is what is so important to our campaign in the end. Finally, this was a quickly updated slide from yesterday after the Queen's speech, but the Queen's speech yesterday included lots of policies affecting what the government's going to be campaigning on in this sitting of Parliament, but they also recommitted to protecting renters' rights. That's really, really important for us because it shows the government is still interested or still wants to campaign on the Renters Reform Bill. So it's a great indication that they're working on it and they'll continue to work on it. They've also said they're going to bring forward a white paper in autumn. So that gives us a clear timeline of how this of how we're going to be campaigning on it. As part of that white paper, they're going to bring forward plans to scrap Section 21, a lifetime deposit scheme. So basically, when you pay a deposit, it will follow you from house to house rather than having to pay a new deposit each time, and also improvement to standards in rented accommodation. So these are three things they're going to look at as part of the white paper. But most excitingly, well, not most excitingly, but another really exciting addition for us is they want to consult on the merits of a landlord register. So that would be a national landlord register that all landlords have to sign up to if they're going to rent out their home. It was for us a really positive Queen's speech, and it gives us a lot of energy going into a next wave of campaigning, because we know that we know that there's some really great stuff here that we can campaign around and continue to show show the strength of our campaign. Finally, before we stop talking about, before me, Ruth and Amy stop talking, is the eviction ban is lifting on the 31st of May. It has been extended lots of times over the last 16, 17 months, but this time we don't expect it to be lifted again. In fact, it won't be lifted again. From the 1st of June, notice periods will go down to 4 months, so down from 6 months. And by the 1st of October, notice periods will return to pre-pandemic levels. If you are worried about being evicted or need housing advice, please do visit our shelter advice pages. You can do that by typing into Google shelter get help, and specifically for private renting, type in shelter get help private renting, and that will pull it up. Or we can post these website addresses into the chat as well, so you can find them there. But yeah, please do use our, so please do visit our website if you are worried about losing your home or need some housing advice. And that is me, and I'll pass back over to Sophie.
Thanks, James, Ruth and Amy. That was really interesting, and a lot of information that you've covered there. And yeah, just to reiterate, if there are, I know there are lots of people sharing in the chat, and I'm really pleased to see such a lively chat, lots of solidarity there. Please do make sure you're getting the best advice. We're not able to offer advice in this section today, but do visit our website. We've got links to share with you. I know that there have been a few questions in the chat, which is great, and we've done our best to try and filter out some. So I'm going to ask Fahim if there are some questions that we can filter through, and it will be a case of seeing who's best placed to answer those. Is that okay?
Yeah, so we had a question from Katie Simpson. Is there going to be a clause in the ban for landlords who want to sell their property?
So I can take this one. So I'm assuming that this is like post Section 21, when no fault evictions have been abolished, and there will be grounds for possession in cases where a landlord wants to sell their property or move back in, as well as like the fault grounds as well, like non-payment of rent or antisocial behaviour. And what is going to be such a key part of our campaign is that we make sure that those new grounds for possession, or the amended grounds for possession around if a landlord wants to sell their property, that there's a really high evidence bar, so that we don't just see landlords saying, oh, I'm going to sell up, you have to get out, and then they actually re-let the property for more rent. And you see that going on Rightmove 3 weeks later. So what we want is that landlords really have to show that they are meaning to sell their property really soon, and that they're in the process of doing it, and that they have evidence like a draft contract with a named buyer further down the line. And what we kind of want from that is to encourage landlords to sell with sitting tenants as well, because actually many buy-to-let landlords end up selling their property onto another buy-to-let landlord, and there's no reason to evict people anyway. They're kicking someone out of their home just for the purpose of selling it on. So yes, they will be able to, but we need to make sure that that still is a real protection for renters.
Great, thank you so much, Ruth. Farheen, do we have any more questions? Maybe we can do 2 of them. We've got about 5 minutes. We can do 2 and we can see who's best placed to answer.
Yep. So another question we got was, are Section 21 evictions mostly in new buy-to-rent landlords or long-term landlord estates? And is this a city problem?
Ruth or Amy, I'm looking at you guys.
I can take this one again for
Go on.
there you go.
The simple answer is no. It's a problem that we see across the country, literally everywhere where you see private rentals, you will see Section 21. It's people can be evicted if they're on an assured short hold tenancy, or at the end of the assured short hold tenancy period, they can be served as Section 21. So it's all kinds of landlords can serve them, basically. It's not just a buy-to-let thing at all.
Cool. I think I saw a hand up somewhere. I'm afraid there is someone who has joined, thank you for joining, called Just iPhone. I'm not sure if you want to put a question in the chat or you've disappeared from my screen now. So please do feel free to put a question in the chat. And in the meantime, Farheen, I think we've got a few more minutes if we have any other questions from the audience. It's quite a long chat to filter through, isn't it? This is why we're trying to say people write in capitals. Well, we've got a hand up from Marjorie. Maybe we can see, Marjorie, if we can get a question from you. What I might do is let you ask your question yourself, actually. Let me just see if I can do that for you.
Okay.
There you go.
Yeah.
Hiya. Hold on.
My concern is with domestic violence survivors and the appalling state of the DWP failing women, which is against the state duty of care to United Nations directives by the Rapporteur for Violence Against Women in both war and peacetime. My problem has been, because I am a survivor, I've had eviction notices when I was in a private rent, because I accrued debts, not my personal debts, but because the system kept failing me and creating debts. And then in a council property, which I'm in now, and that I also had a threat of eviction, which I felt was absolutely appalling. The risk is to our lives. We could either go back to our perpetrator who left us penniless and the reason why we're struggling, we could go back and the next beating be our murder, or we could commit suicide with depression, because the only reason why we're in that situation is because of domestic violence. So I feel a better platform of support is absolutely needed for survivors of domestic violence.
Marjorie, I think I couldn't agree more. There definitely needs to be more support, and I thank you for sharing your experience and for contributing to the discussion. I think there are a few things in there, and I wonder if Ruth or Amy, if you wanted to respond to any of the things covered in Marjorie's question.
I think, yeah, thank you, Marjorie. As Sophie said, thank you very much for sharing that, and we completely agree. I think particularly in the private rented sector, there's really little support for for survivors of domestic abuse. And that's something that we've been calling for the government to look at as part of these reforms, is looking at how joint tenancies are managed. Because as you say, you're liable for the rent regardless what happens, if your name is on the tenancy agreement, and actually there needs to be a better system because that just isn't workable. So it is something that we're speaking to the government about, and we hope to see as part of the package of reforms.
Okay, right, we've got about a minute left, and I can see 2 hands in the room. Because it's only 2 hands, I'm going to let you ask the questions. Please do me a favour and make clear the question part, and we will do our best to respond to them. And then after that, we're going to move to the next section. So Claire, I'm going to ask you to unmute yourself so you can ask the question yourself. You should be able to do that now. Go on.
Hi. Oh, can you hear me?
Yeah.
Yeah, cool. Hi. Is this related to renting somewhere in the first place? I struggle. So I mean, everyone struggles. I know with it, and being on universal credit, and I've got a dog as well, which is another massive barrier. But like, I know that there were new rules put in place, weren't there, for that they can't discriminate on people who are on housing benefits. But myself, and also I've got a couple of friends in the same situation who like would go to the estate agents, and then they say, like, I mean, I've had them just outright say, like, oh no, sorry, we don't accept any sort of benefits, and then I've said, you know, isn't this discrimination and that, and then they just say, oh well, you know, you can come and look at it, but there's, like, you know, loads of other people who are going to come and look at it as well, and you just know that they're, you know, they're saying, oh, come and look at it because they kind of have to. I think that, you know, the fact that the issue has been raised, but they're still like worming their ways around it, saying, oh no, it's in the mortgage or it's in the insurance. You know, and having a dog as well, it's just like I just have to lie, like, everywhere I go. I feel like my you know, my housing's kind of under threat, and knowing how hard it is when you go back out there to look. Yeah, just, I don't know, I don't really know what my question is. I just, yeah.
That's okay, Claire, because I mean, I think what you're talking about is what we would call this DSS discrimination. So when people find it impossible to rent a property even though they can afford it because they're in receipt of housing benefit. And I mean, Amy, who's here today, is actually part of the campaign group that is working on that issue. And I think, Amy, it would be great to hear some of like what you have to say about that. And then after that, I'm afraid we're going to go to the next section. Mick, we're going to come back to your question though. Amy, do you want to respond?
Yeah, sure. We've been running a campaign against this kind of discrimination for the past 2.5 years now, probably. And so it was through us that those legal cases have been taken, like, to court and stuff, to challenge letting agents that are doing this, because it's against the law. It's discrimination. So we've done loads of things over the past few years, because, like you said, letting agents will say, oh, it's not our fault, it's the mortgage terms. So we worked with the whole mortgage industry and we have got rid of all those mortgage terms. So it's not true. If they say to you it's in the mortgage terms, it's not true. And they'll say, oh, it's the insurance, but there's plenty of insurance products available to rent to anyone, regardless of where their income comes from. So again, it's not true. It's a landlord's responsibility to buy an insurance product that covers them for their legal responsibilities. That includes not discriminating against anyone unlawfully. So they need to buy the right insurance product. If you are like experiencing this a lot, we've got on our website, we've got a whole section about DSS discrimination, and there's like template letters on there and stuff that you can send to letting agents if this is happening. You can also like join our campaign, or if you've got a particular case, like there's steps on there that says that tells you the steps that you need to take in order for us to maybe help you with a legal challenge against a letting agent that's doing this. So there's loads of things you can do, and there's loads of stuff available on our website. I could talk about it forever, but I probably shouldn't. So that'll be for now. Cheers though, Claire.
Thanks very much. So time is 20 to 7 and I'm going to move us on, but everyone has permission to yell at me in the chat if I forget to come back to Mick. I want to bring your question in. But what we're going to do now is we are going to touch on the fact that it is not just Shelter that is campaigning around the Renters Reform Bill and is feeling the impact of a bad renting system. And so we're going to have a section now where we hear from 3 speakers. The first speaker is going to be Larissa Kennedy from NUS. The second is going to be Sue James from Legal Action Group. And the third is going to be Richard, who has his own stories. And judging by the chat, it's not too dissimilar from some of you guys' experiences. So we don't have too much time before Larissa will sadly have to leave. So I'm going to start with Larissa, and I'm going to introduce her with the introduction she deserves. So Larissa Kennedy is the NUS National President, elected to represent the 7 million students across further and higher education in the UK. She's also on the board of Students Organising for Sustainability, a charity set up by students and staff at NUS in 2019 in response to the climate emergency, and the board of Free Black University. Prior to this, Larissa was Education Officer and Deputy President of Warwick Students' Union, where she founded the Warwick Decolonise Project. And I just have to say, that is an amazing bio, and I clearly need to up my bio game. But on that note, Larissa, I just want to invite you to take the mic.
Thank you so much, Sophie, and thanks for having me. So I'm Larissa, I'm 22, my pronouns are she, her, and I have the joy and privilege of being president at NUS. And so we're essentially a confederation of about like 500 students' unions across the 4 nations of the UK. And so we're mandated to represent the millions of students in the UK, and we're 90 years old now, well, 99 years old now at NUS, but for decades now, the inaccessibility and unaffordability of student housing has been really, really high on the agenda for us. And while students may only make up about 5% of the private rented sector, with over 500,000 student renters, we are a pretty rowdy bunch. And this has been particularly true during the pandemic. And you know, Shelter was talking there in the introductory presentation about people power. And that is something that the student movement has in masses. And this year we've seen the biggest wave of student housing activism in the history of the student movement. There have been rent strikes over 50 universities across the UK. And this has largely been sparked by the fact that students have been paying for accommodation that they haven't been in. Because of the nature of student housing, we tend to sign up to housing months and months before we actually use it. And so back when the pandemic looked like it would only be a few months long, how silly that seems now, student renters ended up trapped in contracts under the promise that by the time they went back to university, everything would be normal. But of course that didn't happen. And so September rolled around and students were told to move to university, but then quickly by Christmas told to move back to their family homes and not to return. And so you've got a case where thousands upon thousands of students are living back at home, paying for accommodation halfway across the country. So there are some international students who've been paying for housing here in the UK since last summer, but haven't been able to step foot in the country. And what does that look like in terms of numbers? Well, by mid-February, the average student had paid £1,621 in rent for empty rooms, and that number has continued to rise, with the collective spend on unused housing being about £1 billion. So it's pretty stark. And for some students, this was like the first time they'd ever lived independently at 18 years old. That could be, you know, your daughter, your granddaughter, do you know what I mean? And it was a complete shock. And for others, we've got mature students, student parents and carers, and they were caught in this really, really precarious financial position. And so, as I said, you've got thousands of students on rent strike withholding their rent right now, with demands ranging from rent rebates in the here and now to longer term rent reductions. And lots of these students have been really, really keen to talk about the broader problems here. And some of these problems are those which I think the coalition is trying to address. And I just wanted to share a few of those things that students face year in and year out. So back in 2019, NUS surveyed over 2,000 students through our Homes Fit for Study research. And the responses exposed this huge financial strain on student renters, but then also the horrific conditions of rented student housing and the exploitative relationships that landlords and students often had. So looking at the financial side, half of student renters spend over 75% of their income on housing. This means that it's just a huge stretch to make ends meet for a lot of students. And this year that has been so brought to light, where 9% of students have had to access food banks. And then looking at those kind of conditions that students are experiencing, of students that rent their homes, 42% lived with damp and mold growing on their walls and ceilings. 1 in 5 students shared their homes with mice, rats, slugs, or other pests. Even more alarmingly, 16% of students reported that there were electrical hazards in their home, and a further 9% reported an issue with gas safety, despite it being illegal to rent out a property in this condition. So of course, these are like huge physical health concerns, but it definitely doesn't end there, because, you know, we as students often talking about the impacts of our lived realities, of our material conditions on mental health. And over a third of students had reported that the state of their rented property left them feeling anxious or depressed. 17% said it exacerbated an existing mental health condition, and 12% said their living environment brought about a new health condition. And this was all amplified for the most marginalized students, disabled students, students from low income backgrounds, and so on. So it's really, really imperative for us as a national union to be defending students' renters' rights from exploitative costs to horrific conditions, and the kind of the other ways that that impacts our communities. But it's equally important that we're standing in solidarity with other renters who are bearing the brunt of a society that treats housing like a commodity rather than a human right. And so we're really excited about this opportunity through the coalition to do things like scrap Section 21 and to introduce a lifetime tenancy deposit, so that we avoid these situations where renters are consistently rendered powerless and out of pocket and so on. But in addition to these changes, we also know there's a far broader package of reforms needed to secure the ability for example, students to give notices on their contracts. Right now, we only have that in Scotland, but we want to secure that elsewhere in the UK. We also want to end the practice of students signing tenancies way too far in advance, and a culture that produces that. We want to get things like rent controls and stabilisation in place, and a variety of other things that I'm sure there's so much synergy between us and you folks on. But yeah, as I say, solidarity from us to you folks, and we would really, really, really appreciate if you would join us and sign our petition, which is calling not only for rent rebates, but a whole suite of other things in relation to the pandemic and the way that students have been treated. And yeah, we hope to continue to work together and so on through the coalition and beyond. But yeah, I just wanted to end by saying that there is so much energy among renters right now to recognise that we just cannot continue on with the way things are. So I'm really, really looking forward to reimagining the realities of housing, of the right to housing, of the right to safety, alongside all of you. So thank you for having me.
Larissa, that was amazing, and there was so much in what you just said there. You've packed so much in. I mean, I know you've got to go in a minute, but just quickly to say, like so much of what you said around like what students have to deal with, the conditions they have to live in, like some of that research you've done is so strong. And I think one thing that we've all felt during the pandemic is the exacerbation, like you say, of many of the issues that we already know exist, and the impact on mental health, especially for students who, like you said, are doing some like living out for the first time. That's your first taste of independence, and that's been your experience of renting, or not even being able to rent and having to pay crazy sums of money. So I mean, I know that I don't want to respond too much because I know you're going to have to jump out, but before you do go, you mentioned how people can support the work you're doing. Is there a link, or is there a way that we can share that with people, because you might then end up leaving?
Yes, before I jump out, I'm so sorry that I do have to leave. I will put something in the chat if that's all right. And yeah, just thank you so much for having me, and really love the event.
Thank you so much, Larissa. I'm really sorry that we didn't have enough time to like get some questions in, but yeah, please do share that link before you go, and we'll definitely chat going forward, and look forward to working with the NUS through the coalition. Cool. Right, let's I think let's move on, and we'll have we'll get to hear from Sue and Richard. Brilliant, thank you so much, Larissa. So I'm going to introduce Sue, who's going to speak, and then we'll also hear from Richard, and then that will be a great time to get some questions from people, starting with you, Mick. I've got my eye on you. Right, so Sue let me just get the introduction out. Sue James is the Chief Executive of Legal Action Group. Prior to this, she was the Director and Solicitor at Hammersmith Law Centre, where she specialised in housing law. She is an experienced court duty advocate, having spent the last 15 years delivering and running 2 housing possession duty schemes in West London, getting tongue-tied. She's a founding trustee of Ealing Law Centre and has worked in law centres most of her career. In 2017, she won the Legal Aid Lawyer of the Year, Legal Aid Lawyer of the Year Outstanding Achievement Award. Wow, I'm really messing this up, aren't I? She's a co-author of Housing Possession Duty Desk, a practical guide, co-editor, and Legal Aid Handbook, Legal Aid Handbook and Justice Matters, and Right Speaks and campaigns on access to justice, housing and legal aid. So I should have rehearsed that, but it's another amazing introduction, and I'm really looking forward to hearing what you have to say. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you, Sophie. Yeah, that's fine. Just to reiterate there, yeah, I've been a housing lawyer for 30 years, and that was pretty much at the point where the lovely Rent Act 1977 was being replaced with the Housing Act 1988. And since then, we've had no reform in terms of pretty much in terms of renters' rights. And so it really feels, I like the hashtag enough is enough, because I think that's probably where we are now. So yeah, I mean, the last 15 years, I've pretty much represented people every Friday at Brentford County Court. And I worked for a piece that I did recently that I'd probably represented 5,000 people in court who turned up without their solicitor. And I think, you know, seeing people who are at crisis point at the courts and, you know, nowhere else to turn, legal aid has reduced so much that has been kind of really critical. And what I've also seen is when you take on someone's case, or when you are able to resolve their case, that it can transform lives. And I've seen the difference that really good quality, you know, secure housing can have. And I, you know, hearing from Larissa there, it's interesting because I've got 2 sons, both of which have gone through university now, both of which have had really poor accommodation. And I have done, you know, like, Mum, can you do something about this? So having your mum as a housing lawyer doesn't stop you from having bad housing as well, which, but I've known what to do in terms of trying to get that sorted. And I recently was asked to chair the coalition, and I very much wanted to do that because I thought, with my experience and knowledge and moving into a different role at Legal Action, it's a publisher, it's a voice of the kind of access to justice sector, that we could really have some influence in trying to make change. And I think the biggest thing that we need to do is to get round this idea that, you know, rented homes are just for profit, and to see them as like real homes, and more than just a contract. And having, you know, giving renters that certainty for them to be able to put down roots and you know, make them a real home for people and communities to live in. And one of the things that I've seen very much in my time over the, you know, in particular the last 5 to 10 years, is the increase that, you know, families are being increasingly living in private rented accommodation. It's being used to discharge duty in terms of homelessness, and people have spent many years, still continue to spend many years in that insecure accommodation, moving schools. It's really bad for families, it's bad for children. And then at the same time, I've seen an absolutely decline in the condition of accommodation. And, you know, the photographs that you showed at the beginning there, Sophie, in terms of disrepair, you know, I think what we've seen recently on ITV, which has just been a really brilliant campaign by them to actually show conditions in tower blocks. And I don't know if people have seen it, but if you can go back, it's probably on YouTube and stuff. But in my 30 years, I've seen some of the worst disrepair on ITV recently in those tower blocks. And speaking with the journalist there, he said that 100 people a week are emailing their special email address to say that they're also experiencing the same conditions. So again, your hashtag enough is enough. It really does feel like we've reached a crisis where things need to change. And that's why I've decided to join the coalition and fight for the things that, you know, Shelter has outlined tonight. That's all I'm going to say for now, but I'm happy to take questions. And, you know, we've got Richard who's going to talk about his own personal experience. And I think, you know, I've heard lots of stories. It's not about my story. I've had poor accommodation in rented, but that was when I was a student. And I interviewed Ken, I'll just finish with this, but I interviewed Ken Loach very recently. And I asked him, you know, Shelter and Crisis were pretty much set up the same time that Cathy Come Home. It's a film, if you haven't seen it, it's worth seeing. But basically, the homelessness situation was so poor 50 years ago that Ken Loach did this film. And it seemed to me watching it very, very recently that nothing had changed. And, you know, we're still fighting for, you know, people to have a decent home. And I think if we can start this campaign and generate some interest and really get behind it, we can start to think about a right to a home, a right to a good, decent home that needs to be something that we get out of this as well. And thank you.
Thanks so much, Sue. And I totally agree. Like when we were chatting before, we were talking about, you know, Cathy Come Home, and I was talking about the fact that I'd been to like this really interesting like training on the history of housing and how housing and our concept of what a home should be has changed over the years. And, you know, what really saddened me is that, yeah, again, like so many of the issues that we saw decades ago are still very present today. And even if some of it isn't always in your face, incredibly visible, you've got loads of people in really awful situations. And I, do very much hope that the coalition and working together will kind of build that momentum and make sure that this is the time that we do push for that change. And I'm hoping there will be questions for you, Sue. But before that time, I'd love to introduce Richard, because Richard, you've got quite I don't know what the word is, because it's awful really to hear about some of the things that you've been dealing with, but I'm going to let you speak about that. But first of all, if it's okay, I'm going to, in the same way, give you a bit of an introduction, if that's all right. So Richard, lovely to have you with us. He's self-employed and owns his own private catering and cake baking company based in South Manchester. In the past, he has worked as a benefits agency assessor advisor for the, for the job centre, and as a specialist disability advisor for the Department of Work and Pensions. He has, like I said, plenty of his own experiences to share with you today, and I think that it's best that we hear that from Richard. So Richard, feel free to take the mic. You're on mute. So I'll just take you off there. So I will just do my little button pressing and see if I can sort that out for you. There we go.
Okay, can you hear me now?
Go for it.
Well, I had a mortgage from the age of 20 and I only went into private renting in about 2016, and I moved into a property that looked really nice. We went to see it, and within 4 months we started seeing like signs of mold and damp occurring on pillows and things like that. So being asthmatic and having allergies, me and my partner reported it to the landlady. We weren't aware at that time what the rules and regulations were around them coming out and dealing with these situations, but we were basically ignored from the off. And from then on, month upon month, it was more and more things that sort of started to emerge in the house that were wrong. There was an infestation of slugs, there was electrical problems. This particular landlady that we had a panel beating business, so I think essentially what she'd done is just panelled up the whole of the house and never actually dealt with any repairs that were deep rooted within that. We had a cellar that flooded continuously, which led to rising damp up the walls. The main issue for me was the health element of it. You should never underestimate how much mold and spores and damp can really get to your health. I've only just started to get my voice back after a year, but I was croaking for a full year, and because of the effect it was having on my health. I'd come out of work for periods of time with chest infections, things like that. They just refused at all points to come out and look at it in any great length. It's not acceptable for them to do that. You should never give up pushing and pushing to try and get them out to do it for you. what they were very good at, this landlady and landlord, were dodging any sort of responsibility, and they would almost like, you would feel like you were making a fuss. I think it's quite a common thing for them to do that, to shirk responsibility, really. Eventually, there was such a myriad of problems. We had no cooker, the electricity's tripped. Then the crux of the whole thing was in 2019, in the January, my partner had a stroke, and started suffering with psoriasis, and then he developed into like asthma, and had a stroke. Now, you could say it's ridiculous to be there 2 years on, but we were just dealing with the problems as we were being told to do. And we had a dog as well, which that lady mentioned earlier, does sort of pose a problem when you're looking for accommodation, to get decent accommodation, because people don't want pets. And we were made to basically feel that by the landlord, like we're quite lucky to be in accommodation, and we wouldn't find anywhere else. So basically, put up and shut up. Well, we'd had enough by the January, so we didn't pay our rent in the January 2019, just to see whether they would come out and do the repairs. Now we knew technically you're not allowed to do that, but he didn't make them come out. He came out and did an assessment. He came out and did an assessment, and then spent the next 2 months avoiding coming out and dealing with anything that he put on his list that he agreed to do. The house itself, it was just a death trap. By the time we'd left, there was ceilings leaking. There was like radiators loose on walls. There was mold all up the back of furniture. We had to throw endless things away. We had to throw our clothes away, bedding away. We were constantly buying dehumidifiers for the house. We were repainting because it was affecting the walls and everything like that. We were constantly bleaching and cleaning. We're two professionals. We were both working hard. But the main thing is when my partner had a stroke, they basically told us that they had no time to deal with that. They just wanted the rent, and they weren't interested in anything we had to say. It had a knock-on effect on the salary we had coming in, because I was self-employed, and my partner didn't receive sick pay at the time. So we were trying to like work out a way of moving forward, because we were clueless to the whole benefit system or anything like that. We never claimed it. And when I worked in that, it's all changed since then. It's universal credit. We did get some good advice, but in the long term, they were just a pair of bullies. And it's a cliche, but I would just hate anyone else to go through the same things I went through. There should be some type of information given to tenants at the start of a tenancy that tells them exactly what they need to do at any stage, no matter how small the problem. You've got a right to be able to report something to your landlord and for them to come out and deal with it. By the time we'd left, my partner had a stroke, could hardly walk, couldn't speak properly, and they left us with no lighting in the upstairs of the house, and they knew about it. They knew about it for months and months. They knew about the damp for 3 years. I took videos over 3 years, sent them to them. Just absolutely shameless conduct, really. We paid our rent every month. They didn't have a problem with us paying our rent. When we did report too many things to them at one point, they tried to evict us, served us a Section 21, and told us that we basically had no rights. They didn't want us there anymore because we were unreliable. She reported us to the benefits office for fraudulent activity when we weren't claiming anything, because we'd withheld the rent on this January month. And then they both systematically dual-pronged my guarantor into trying to get them to pay damages when we'd left. That it had already gone through an adjudicator at the deposit holding company, and they deemed that she didn't have enough evidence to claim anything for damages. There was no damages that were our fault. There was leaks, there was slugs, there was. I could go on forever about that. But what I would really like to stress is that this new reform and everything is hopefully going to stop this happening to other people. I dread to think my situation probably isn't the worst out there, but it was bad enough, really bad enough. And I think a lot of the way they treated us contributed to health conditions, and the way they treated us after the stroke issue, and when our dog had died that same week, they had absolutely no compassion with regards to our situation. they used to come around the house, knocking on the door, trying to get in, and they locked us out when we were moving out, and we couldn't get back into the house. And they demanded we go back to collect our things. We never reported them to the police, and we didn't know exactly where to go. It's until you go through that experience yourself, you're learning as you're going. But there should be something in place at the start of that tenancy that comes with your tenancy agreement that you sign, that tells you exactly what to do at every step, what is classed as a problem and what's not, because you don't find out until you get them. You start looking online or going to the council or whatever, and you start looking at shelters advice, that you find these things out, and you feel like you're unarmed at the start. And if you're the type of people like we are, and we didn't want to either, we didn't want to create a fuss, I'd never ever do that again, because it just was such detriment to us. But I'm glad the legislation to also include something along the lines of making the landlord meet with the tenant prior to the tenancy agreement, because they use a letting agent to recruit us, and she became our landlady from the day we moved in. Now, in the 3 years we were there, she never ever met us once. So there was no personability there. There was no relationship there where she felt any guilt by the way she was treating us, because she never met us. And basically, that's all I'd like to say on the issue. I hope there's not. I hope people aren't just sitting in it and just putting up with it and coping with it. You know, you may not get where you want to get at first, or get it done as quickly. But I mean, they left us without gas safety checks and things like that, and we did report it eventually. But you know, it was a bit too late by that point to do anything about it. And you know, but we did get there in the end, and you know. We do think that something, you know, has come of this. I think they were checked on somebody, one of the government officials, like the council officials, went round and did an assessment and stuff. And I don't know what the outcome of that was, but I know this has gone on before our tenancy. It was with other tenants as well, because we managed to contact them and speak to them. And it was an ongoing thing. It wasn't just us. You shouldn't be allowed to get away with it, basically. You're paying your rent, you're entitled to live in a clean, safe environment. And that's all I would like for tenants to have that right to live in, really. Absolutely. Without the stress.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think that the fact that there is so much of the experience that you've gone through over this period of time, and the massive impact that it's had on your health, physically, emotionally, and you said a moment ago, sure, it's not the worst situation. I mean, the fact is there's probably a whole wide spectrum of things that are going on that just shouldn't be going on.
Yeah.
You're absolutely right that there needs to be clearer ways that tenants can get support and help. And yes, Shelter always here. We have loads of information on our website. But the fact of the matter is that it shouldn't be that hard. There should be.
There used to be a shortage. I think there's a bit of a shortage in councils of the teams that used to be there, that you were assigned an advisor at one time who would deal with it. I had a problem with the private housing sector years ago, and I got an advisor assigned, and it was dealt with really quickly. Whereas I think there's that many. I mean, it's happening so frequently now. I don't think there's the staff to cope with it.
No, yeah, exactly. And I love the way that when you were speaking, you brought it round to that people shouldn't have to go through this going forward, and that there does need to be reform. And like now, like I've said before, like is this moment. And I mean, I know that we're at, where are we? We're at 7:10 at the moment. And I think that there's probably some questions and contributions that people have. I saw some nodding when you were both speaking. What we wanted to do originally is have a bit of a facilitated discussion to bring you both in, and also Larissa as well. But because we are short on time, I do think it would be valuable to hear from the audience to see if there are questions for you guys. And I am going to, I know that Fahim's been doing a great job of putting things out in the chat. So I'm going to come to you, Fahim, but what I first want to do is bring in Mick. Mick, thank you for being so patient. I'm going to let you ask your own question. Do me a favour, everyone that I give the mic to, please make it clear what your question is. And if we could bear in mind timing, I'm just saying that so no one feels targeted. I'll say it at the start. But Mick, you should be able to turn yourself off mute now. Okay, go on.
Hello, can you hear me?
Yeah.
Okay, I'll try and keep this brief. I have been renting for 2 years. I live in a block of 4 flats. My flat is an ex-local authority flat. Every other tenant, the other 3 tenants in the building, are local authority tenants. I pay just over £300 a month more than they do in rent. And I would just like to know if we're, as a campaign, we're trying to get rent capping, you know, in addition to like getting rid of like the, you know, people being evicted for the wrong reasons and stuff like that. I've got a good landlord. You know, it's a nice flat. I haven't got any issues other than having no security going forward in the future, and the fact that like I can only just afford about to live.
Yeah, that's a really good point. I think if it's okay, I think Ruth and Amy may have a response to that question.
Thanks, Mick. I think your situation raises like so many issues that demonstrate how broken our housing system is. Like the fact that you have people living side by side who pay completely different rents, the fact that social housing has been sold off and replaced by really expensive private renting, like also underpins like the catastrophic lack of social housing in this country, and like successive governments have failed to address that. On the question of rent caps and private rents, it's not within the scope of the Renters Reform Bill. I think we have loads of challenges when we talk about affordability in the private rented sector, you know, given our government and like, you know, how the Conservative government tends to feel about like rent control. We do support rent stabilisation, so that's things like limiting increases to rent increases within tenancies, but obviously that doesn't address the fundamental problem that your rent is just too high and it's not affordable. When we look at rent caps, I think something that is really like looking back to that international comparison. So we have basically the least regulated private rented sector in Europe, and rent capping is something that exists only in like really in very few countries. Basically, we have very little international evidence. So when we look at like the journey to a nation or private rented sector where we have those kind of rent caps, there are loads of steps in between, because obviously to flip from what we have now to a situation with rent caps is going from the least regulated to the most regulated sector like overnight. So there's definitely a journey to go on. And I think the other really crucial thing that I see has been touched on loads in the chat and links to this is the fact that local housing allowance, so the housing benefit that is meant to cover private rent, is just deeply insufficient. So we saw it kind of frozen and reduced for years and years and years, so that it local housing allowance didn't cover the two-bed property in 97% of the country up until last year. It took a global pandemic for the government to lift local housing allowance rates to cover just the bottom 30th percentile of rents. But so that means that the bottom third of rents in any given area, that's where the local housing allowance rate is set. But we know that there are lots of people who live in places that are more expensive than that, and they have to. We know that 40% of people now claim housing benefit in the private rented sector, so there just simply aren't enough affordable properties. So the affordability crisis is one that the government has to address, and we're pushing for them to do so, like, you know, in the same time frame as the bill, even if it's not the bill. So that means keeping local housing, at least keeping it linked to the 30th percentile of rents, and looking at rent stabilisation as well.
Thank you.
Brilliant. Right. Now I just want to make some space, as promised, for if there are any questions for around anything that Subhamit should have touched on today. I know that Faheen's been having a little scout through, but I'm seeing lots of comments in that chat, so I don't know if there are any questions that we've got at the moment. Here we go. We've got Amy. Amy, if there's no rush to ask those questions, I'm going to do the same. I'm going to let you ask your question. I think you can unmute now if you want to ask that.
Hi, thank you. Yeah, I experienced this whole, I have a job now, but I lost my job because of the pandemic. And then I then went through the breakup of a relationship, so I had to find somewhere to live. And I guess I'm quite a confident speaker and quite confident to handle challenges, but you know, when you're in that situation, you don't want to be handling these challenges, and trying to find a new place when you're unemployed is unbelievable rocket science. But one thing that sort of came up was, you know, it is really difficult when the first thing they do is ask you, what do you do for a living? And then you say, I'm unemployed. So I sort of skirted around that question as much as I could, and then until the last point. But the reality is that people said no, they wouldn't see me. they wouldn't see me. So I'm just wondering if there's any way we can, you know, have somewhere where we can report this, because I had to haggle and have all sorts of conversations with people that were just bollocks, excuse my language. But yeah.
It's okay, sometimes we feel strongly. Seems like you've been through some things with that pandemic, and I think, Amy, were you going to come in and jump for that response?
Yeah, just quickly then. So all letting agents have to they have to belong to a ombudsman, like a regulator. So there's only 2 of those that exist. One's the property ombudsman, and the other one is called the property redress scheme. So they're the people that you can complain to about an agent if an agent is doing this, and I like seriously encourage you to do that, because we're working closely with them at the moment to get those ombudsman regulatory bodies to do more on this, because we agree not enough is being done. So we're taking these legal challenges and we're actively trying to do this, but
yeah,
enough people are kind of with us on it.
I wanted to also ask, obviously it's quite challenging actually proving that, because the first thing they ask, so, you know, why should they ask me what I do for a living? Is that not a leverage point?
So if you want to check on our website, like I said before, we've got like a list of the things, because it is really hard to prove stuff, and we've got a list of the things that you need to evidence for us to be able to take a legal challenge. I mean, we say that, like, well, I mean, our position is that all people should be treated on a case-by-case basis whenever they're looking to rent a property. So it shouldn't matter what the job is, it should matter if they can afford to pay. And, you know, if someone's got a good track record of always paying the rent, then, you know, we don't see the risk. And that's the things that should be taken into account, not where the money is coming from. If it comes from the government or a job, it's enough money to cover the rent.
Yeah, I just wondered if maybe like it would be a talking point to maybe stop that question from even happening.
Yeah, sure. It's something that we're exploring, because obviously you go through referencing checks and it's the thing.
Exactly.
Yeah. So that's something that we're kind of working on next.
Okay. All right, thank you. Cool.
Right. I'm doing a time check, people, because we're running out of time, and we've got another couple of things to talk about. So I'm going to Faye, I'm going to ask you, is your question related to any of the 2 speakers that spoke in that second section? Faye, I'm going to unmute you, because you're the last hand up that I can see. I'm going to let you ask your question, but please, hopefully, keep it clear and concise. You're on mute, but you should be able to unmute now. Sorry, Faye.
Got it. Am I unmuted?
Yeah, I'm going to do this.
I'll keep it as brief as I can. So I'm currently facing eviction with Section 21 on the 4th of January. So obviously runs out on the 4th of July. I've got 2 children. I work full-time for the ambulance service. I live in Cornwall, where rental prices have shot through the roof recently, looking at between 900 and 1,200 a month for a 3-bedroom house in the areas that I need. I've registered with the Housing Association. I've been assigned a housing officer. But I'm really struggling to find somewhere, and you know, it's obviously time's running out, so I just wondered if you had any advice, you know, if there was anything that you could suggest that I can do differently. I'm just at a bit of a loss, really, just you know, don't really know what to do.
I just want to say I can hear that this is an issue that's like playing on your mind quite a lot at the moment. I know it's a bit of a tough time, and you are absolutely not alone in the anxiety that you're feeling right now. And I mean, I know it's quite scary to share your situation and talk about it in this way. I can only say that Shelter is always going to be here to help, and we do have advisors and we have channels that you can get some proper advice from. And as much as I would love to be able to give you some advice here, it's not probably the best place for that, but you can absolutely get in touch with our services. And what we will do is we will make sure that everyone who's come today knows exactly where to go after this. Because absolutely you don't need to feel like you're alone. There will be people you can talk with. And I'm like I said, I'm sorry to hear that you're in this situation.
Sorry, I didn't mean to get upset.
Don't worry, Faye, I do this all the time, especially if I'm talking about something that is...
Yeah, it's just sort of bubbling over a bit, you know,
No,
the date's looming and I don't know what to do.
Can I just jump in here? Faye, firstly, I'm so sorry that you're in this situation. It's just horrible. And I think, as Sophie said, like, look at our advice pages, speak to your local authority. But the really important thing to remember is that you don't have to leave your property when the notice expires. So your landlord still has to apply to court for a possession order. And then you only have to legally leave your property when you get a bailiff warrant, which is like months down the line. And I know that isn't an ideal outcome either, because it's horrible waiting in a property when you know you're going to be evicted. But the really crucial thing is that you don't have to leave in July. So I know that date is looming, but like, you've got a lot of time to try and seek some other advice. So follow those pages in the chat, and just wishing you all the best.
Thank you. It's just really hard, like the discrimination thing as well. I'm a single parent, and when I apply for properties, it just seems like they go to working couples. You know, people don't want one income when they can have someone in that's got two incomes. You know, which, you know, I've always paid my rent on time. I'm a key worker. You know. It's really disheartening. Greedy landlords.
It's tough. It is really tough. And I think Amy spoke before about our campaign looking at discrimination around people receiving housing benefit and all the barriers faced. But yeah, we're going to make sure that we send proper follow-up after this to those that came, with links of how you can find out more. And as Lisa Ruth said, I know it's hard, but there is a bit of time and you can get some support.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you so much.
Thanks very much.
So let's do that a little time check. It's 7:20. I'm sure that you guys are all going to be waiting to go and have your dinner. But before you go, I want us to bring back round to the fact that this is about a campaign. This is about change. Everyone here today are people that are already engaged with the work that we do. They already care about the issue, and we've got an exciting year ahead. We've got an opportunity to try and shape the Renters Reform Bill and kind of what that looks like, and to show what issues are important to us. So I wanted to spend a bit of time to give you guys a snapshot of the things to look forward in the year and what to expect, because I mean, it's been really hard to campaign during a pandemic with all the restrictions. Everything has been up in the air, but what we've tried to do is to plan more activities and events that bring us face to face, that allow us to meet you more, to engage more. We don't have too much time today, but the plan is that we want to do more training events to get people campaigning with us, joining us in the activities that we do. We want to work with people to support them to lobby decision makers, whether that's when we support you to do that or whether that's you doing it yourselves. But we also want, you know, and coming back to like the pandemic and what we saw was a lot of people trying to find creative ways to express and to take part and to do things like what I'm calling craftivism here. This is like finding ways to put your energy into something that makes a difference. And so I wanted to do a bit of a kind of spiel around that and kind of get a sense of what your interests are. I don't know if this now is the right place to do that, but what I wanted to say is do stay engaged with us, because there are lots of things that you can do this year. We're going to find our way around the restrictions, we're going to find our way around the logistics, and we're going to be looking at campaigning in really key areas. We want to do all sorts of things, including arts and crafts, things that you can get your families involved with. Who doesn't love a handmade card, sending a message straight to a decision maker? So there are lots of things that we're trying to do this year. And as I said, like before, we didn't go into it in much detail, but it's Shelter and like countless other organisations that are coming together to push for this. So do like stay tuned, keep an eye out on our mailing list. That's where we're going to be putting out opportunities. And as we're at kind of like 10 past, I think it might be worth doing a bit of a wrap up. Love it. Carol. Sorry, I'm just going to respond to this in the chat. Craftivism excites me. Brilliant. Crochet. This is what I'm trying to talk about. All these new skills that we all have that we can bring, because there's not just one way to campaign. So yeah, Carol, I mean, I'm going to hold you to that and send you some stuff that you can do this year. So yeah, let's talk about next steps, what you can do after this. Number one, most important thing, if, you know, as we've said before, if you're anxious, if you've got your own situation that you're dealing with, you're unsure of what to do next, you're feeling a bit overwhelmed, which I would not be surprised if many people are. There are lots of places you can get advice on our website, and we do have web chat, we have advisors, we're always here to support you. So number one, make sure you please go to our website in the first instance. It's where we put up lots of information, including things that are changing. The second thing that I was going to say, you could go and hear about some of our speakers' work. So Larissa's already shared a link in the chat. Sue James, it sounds like you've done some amazing books, done some amazing research, but Sue is going to be working with us doing the coalition. So, I mean, Sue, I don't know if there's anything else that you wanted to say in terms of any way that people can hear more about your work.
Yeah, I mean, what struck me, I've just been scrolling through all the chat, because obviously it's quite hard to do while you're speaking, but there's so many similar stories, and yeah, and I really feel for Amy, who's just been speaking, that kind of threat to your home and your children. So yeah, anything that you want to. So Legal Action Group is a magazine, it's a publisher, and also a voice of access to justice. And so we sell books and write for magazines. So if you've got any stories, thinking about kind of how we can work better together, then yeah, Legal Action Group. So if you Google that, and I'm sure Sophie can send out the details, then so we don't give direct advice, so we wouldn't be able to do that. So Shelter is your best bet for that. But one of the things I want to do is tell stories and get the stories out there, because I think that's where you change hearts, and then the minds go next. So yeah, stories are interesting. So I'll be working alongside the coalition, but maybe building some stories as well. Thanks, Sophie.
Brilliant. And then like I said, so this is all about the Renters Reform Bill campaign. So we have prepared something that Bronya is going to share in the chat with you. We want to kind of end this event by putting out something on across social media. For those of you that have social media, I know not everyone does, to set a reminder of what we're calling for here and getting that out into the kind of the realm, the wild of Twitter and Facebook and Instagram. For those of you who are on social media, if you, as Bronya has eloquently said, if you could, we would love it if you're able to share some of the posts that we have at the end. You can just click those links and share on social media. That would be brilliant. And like I said, keep an eye out for the opportunities that are coming up over the next year. It's going to be an important year. We're really pleased to have had so many with us today. We said we're going to share this recording with those who signed up to come. We're going to look at potentially editing any bits out. I'm sure I messed up little bits, and we'll kind of do that. I'm not going to promise on a time frame, but we will get that out to you and do our best to compile the things we talked about today. So nothing happens when I click on the link. Let us just resolve this right now before we go. So let's just see. I don't know if there's any issue with these links. I'm just going to click on one to see. You know what it might be worth doing? If you're keen to share these links and it's going to be a bit tricky, I reckon do a little jujitsu of copy and paste. If you copy that onto your clipboard, that might be the best way. I'm not sure if when we close this meeting those links won't work, but I don't know. I'm looking at Bronya, who's our social media genius, if you have any thoughts on if it works.
Copying and pasting them would probably be the best bet. They should, if you're on your phone, that might be the reason it's a bit tricky. I'll pop them in the chat again now as separate conversations, so maybe you can click those from there. It might be easier.
Cool, thanks Bronya. And you will all have approximately 30 seconds to do that, because we have come to the end of our event, but don't worry if you don't. There's going to be lots of opportunities for you guys to share and promote and talk about renting over the next year. So on that note, they're in there, get them quick. I'm going to thank you all very much for joining today, and we'll leave it there. I hope you've got something, as Amy says, like that's been cooking over the last while, and you can go and have your dinner. All right. Thank you so much, everyone. We're going to end the meeting. Take care.